It started out like any other night for prison warden Jonathan Graves. He was suffering from psychological problems and hadn't gone home to clear his head. He was sitting at his desk, checking the security cameras. But something caught his attention. His wife, Claire, was heading towards the restricted area, towards the prison barracks. Jonathan frowned. What was she doing there? His wife had worked on the prison's medical team for years, but she had never had to be in such close contact with the inmates. If the inmates had a medical problem, she would notify the guard and go to the infirmary. But since there was a soccer game on that night, Jonathan had given the guards the night off, and he was watching from the cameras. As the footage progressed, he realized that Claire had entered a single cell. Diego Ramirez. Jonathan had a strange feeling. Why was Claire seeing Diego? What could she talk to a prisoner? He put his coffee down on the table and leaned closer to the screen. He saw Claire leaning toward Diego and whispering something in a low voice. Worse. Diego was holding Claire's hand. Jonathan's fingers began to tremble. There could only be one way to explain this. But Jonathan wasn't even ready for the answer he was most afraid to hear. Jonathan didn't take his eyes off the screen that night. Even when Claire left Diego's cell, Jonathan was still sitting there. It couldn't have been a mistake. He had noticed that Claire had been acting strangely for a few days, but he had put it down to fatigue. Now everything was becoming clear. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was part of something bigger. The next day, reviewing the security footage, Jonathan realized that Claire had been meeting with Diego several times over the past few weeks. But more shockingly, one night he realized that Claire had gotten the door code to Diego's cell from the prison's security system and had told Diego. Since Claire was the wife of the prison warden, she could easily enter and exit his room. Jonathan took a deep breath. They're going to escape. It couldn't be. Claire wouldn't put herself at such risk. But Jonathan knew who Diego was. This man wasn't just a prisoner. He was a manipulator. Diego should have tricked Claire. But Jonathan knew now, and he wasn't going to play the game by their rules. He was going to turn this into an opportunity. He would let Claire and Diego escape, but he would never let them go free. As the corridors of the prison plunged into darkness, Claire and Diego moved with bated breath. The blackout signaled the start of their escape plan. Claire checked her surroundings as Diego entered the code that opened the door to his cell. Everything went according to plan. Or so they thought. But Jonathan had already cut the lights and disabled the entire security system. He had given the guards a few hours off, and they were spending time in the mess hall. This was his scene. He locked the door to the mess hall with the guards and went down to the cells. With anger in his eyes, Jonathan waited for Diego in the hallway. "Where are you going, man?" he whispered into the darkness. Before Diego could turn, Jonathan shot him dead in the chest with the AR-15 rifle he had with him. Claire screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos. As the prisoners screamed in panic, Jonathan gave chase. Claire tried to escape, but Jonathan cornered her. "You'll regret making a fool of me," he said. That night, the prison witnessed not only an escape, but a bloody showdown. The prison was now a war zone. Jonathan was walking through the corridors with an AR-15 rifle, shooting anyone who got in his way. The guards had broken down the door to the mess hall and came to the scene of the gunshots. Prisoners and guards were running in terror. No one knew what to do. Claire kept running, gasping for breath. The only thing that could stop her was Jonathan's voice echoing in the darkness. "Don't hide, Claire. This will be the end of you." Just as she turned the corner, a prisoner grabbed her arm and said, "If we don't stop him, none of us will survive." For the first time, anger replaced fear in Claire's eyes. The united prisoners and the surviving guards pinned down Jonathan, who was out of bullets. But Jonathan would not escape. There was no remorse in him. With trembling hands, Claire grasped an iron bar. As Jonathan advanced on her, a prisoner stabbed him in the back with a knife. Jonathan fell to his knees, a crooked smile on his face. "But I won." Everyone died. When the police arrived at the prison, they found a gruesome scene. The corridors were littered with corpses, blood splattered on the walls. The few surviving prisoners and guards were let out in shock. Claire sat trembling in a corner, her face covered in blood. She tried to make sense of what had happened, but she couldn't get Jonathan's crooked smile out of her eyes. Jonathan was seriously wounded and taken to hospital. His only statement to reporters was, "I am not a criminal. I have done justice." A few months later, when the guards entered Jonathan's cell, they found him dead. The policemen looked at each other because there was dried blood on Jonathan's fingers, but there were no cut marks near the body. But something was still there. A shadow, a whisper, an unfinished revenge.